All right, everybody, welcome, good morning. Thanks for coming on the last day of the conference. This is Imaging Workflows using MDM without JAMF. My name is Stephen Short. I work at an internet marketing company called Bazaar Voice in Austin, Texas. Just have a couple brief notes before we start. You can find me on the MacAdmins Slack as Short, and any of the configuration profiles or the scripts that I mentioned today, you can find them on my GitHub as well. So when they post the slides after the conference, you can get all those links there. And I'll save some time for questions at the end. So let's just start with a quick poll. Can I have a show of hands? Is anyone here using JAMF as their MDM provider? Okay, cool. Welcome. Anyone who has a vendor that's not JAMF? So that's me. All right. How about anyone who is not using any MDM solution at all? You're just maybe looking? All right. So especially for this last group, I hope some of what I talk about today can maybe help guide you as to which vendor to use. Because when I say MDM without JAMF, I mean, I think it's a great product, but for various reasons, your organization may not choose it. Could be budget. Maybe a stakeholder prefers another vendor. In my case, you may have Windows devices, Chromebooks, maybe Android, and you don't want to have to go back and forth between multiple vendors. You just want one solution. So when I was researching how to make some adjustments for High Sierra, like with the kernel extensions approval payload, or maybe making accounts that have secure token, almost all my search results brought me back to a JAMF forum, which is great because even if you don't have JAMF, it's a great reference. But a lot of the solutions on there are tailored for JAMF customers, and so depending on your vendor, you may not be able to take advantage of any of those fixes. So there are a few out there: Simple MDM, AirWatch, Cisco Meraki, so that's what my organization uses. There's Mobile Iron, Adigy. Micro MDM is an open source solution out there. I have met some people using Intune that have like a fleet of 5,000 PCs, and marketing has 5 Macs, so they have to manage those somehow. And Centrify. So I mean, I know there's others out there, especially maybe tailored more for the like the education market. But there's a pretty wide range in how well they support macOS. Some are going to have great zero-day support, like for High Sierra or Mojave coming up. Some have good APIs, or they have agents or custom binaries that'll give admins some great tools like advanced policies or like powerful scripting tools. Some may focus on the Mac. Some focus on iOS, and then Mac just kind of tags around as a freebie. And then, yeah, some are going to offer kind of everything under the sun, like Android, Windows, and Chromebook. So one example of a feature that Meraki doesn't support, and I've been told I don't think JAMF has this one quite yet, is AwaitConfiguration. So if your vendor does offer this feature, you should probably be using it. It definitely gets you close to that elusive like zero-touch deployment that everyone kind of talks about. So if your Mac is enrolled in the device enrollment program, this screen should look somewhat familiar. So in Setup Assistant, after you choose like your keyboard language and Wi-Fi network, you get the screen to confirm, yes, I want to enroll this device in my MDM server. Now in the bottom, kind of highlighted in red, let's see. It says contacting enrollment server and configuring your Mac. So if you have AwaitConfiguration, your users just kind of hang out at this page until all of your configuration profiles that you like or any apps that you like to install get to the Mac successfully, so that when your user is at the desktop, everything is just kind of ready to go. That message is kind of generic. So there is another tool out there, Joel Rennick makes it, called dep notify. You should definitely check it out if your vendor supports AwaitConfiguration, because you can maybe present some more helpful messages like installing Microsoft Office, or go get some coffee, come back in half an hour. So your users actually know what's happening in the background. So my goal today is to talk about some of the challenges you might encounter with High Sierra, especially if your MDM vendor doesn't have full support for macOS. And I'll show an example of my imaging workflow using MDM in like a little Munki. So because different MDM providers can kind of vary in how well they support the Mac, I hope you can take at least some aspect of my workflow to kind of help improve your own. I'll also give other suggestions though, like AwaitConfiguration. So even if I can't take advantage of them, maybe your vendor will let you. So this was me when High Sierra launched last year, and I found out Meraki did not have zero-day support for High Sierra. What did work in Sierra or like older versions of macOS just all of a sudden would not work. So just some quick notes about my environment. We have about 1,000 employees. When I started, it was like 50-50 Mac PC. Now it's about 70-30 Mac PC. All the Macs are company owned. We don't do BYOD. IT always provisions the Mac. We won't ship an unconfigured computer to a user and have them set it up. So we know that the employees are going to be coming to some kind of central site. Because the organization used to be dominated by PC, we do have Active Directory. We're not actually binding the Macs to Active Directory. We're using Nomad just to sync the local Mac password against the AD password policy. And we are definitely using the device enrollment program. So if, it's definitely something Apple is kind of steering education enterprise toward. If you've been on the fence, definitely do it. Even if you think, oh, I'm not going to use this for another 6 months, for another year, just at least get enrolled so your devices are just kind of sitting there ready to go whenever you are with your MDM provider. So what do I want in my workflow? So as simple as possible. I don't want the help desk team to have to physically do all these manual tasks. Somewhat easily repeatable. So if you have all of a sudden 25 computers come in, you can do it in a somewhat reasonable rate. And I want to use my vendor's MDM tools whenever possible. So the fewer systems I have to use, fewer things to have to troubleshoot if something goes wrong. So the first challenge I encountered was no zero-day support for High Sierra. I know JAMF did. I think Simple MDM, maybe some other vendors had zero-day support for High Sierra, which is great. Consider yourself fortunate if your vendor does have that. Not having that support on that first day, it can manifest in a few ways, but just something relatively simple. This is a screenshot from my MDM dashboard, and it's just a list of all the different setup assistance screens I'd like to skip. So, I don't want my users to have to enroll their finger and touch ID or deal with Apple IDs or anything like that. It's kind of cut off at the bottom there, but two of the screens that I want to skip are Siri and diagnostics. So in Sierra, there was a dedicated screen in Setup Assistant for location services. So part of just kind of our usual workflow is we'll just check the box to enable location services. So by the time we get to the desktop, it's finding the right time zone and everything like that. In High Sierra, though, we have this new screen, Express Setup. And at first it looks great because it combines Siri, location services, and diagnostics in one. So, fewer things to click through, but because my vendor didn't update for this screen, it actually just ends up skipping location services entirely. So now when I get to the desktop, location services is disabled. And then in 10.13.4, we got an additional screen here for data and privacy. So with location services, there's a screen I do want, but it now skips. Data and privacy is one I don't want, but my vendor doesn't give me just an integrated tool to skip the screen. So another challenge, out of date or incomplete documentation can definitely be frustrating, especially when you're trying to search for some of these workarounds in High Sierra. and sometimes this is an issue from your MDM vendor. I wanted to use my MDM service to push applications to my Macs, but it was running into kind of some inconsistent behavior. Sometimes the app would show up in applications folder, but the logs and the dashboard would say, no, that was incomplete and not successful. And sometimes there'd be no app in applications, but the dashboard would be like, yeah, everything's fine, it was installed. So I'd spend hours troubleshooting back and forth, opened up a support case. And here's a screenshot from documentation, kind of at the bottom. It says, a package or app can be used, but it must be wrapped into DMG. So that's what I was doing. Made sure, I had all my I's dotted and T's crossed. Told support that's what I was doing. And they were like, why would you ever do that? Just put the package in there, and it should just work. So yeah, it was in your documentation. That's why I spent hours doing it. Apple can be this way sometimes too. I'd love a K-base article about secure token, and it would tell us why accounts get it, why accounts may not get that attribute. To their credit though, they have been updating this how to install macOS at your organization page pretty consistently since High Sierra launched. We'll talk about this page a little bit in a few minutes, but there's now a feature that supports kind of like an automated erase and install of your volume before a fresh wipe. So another challenge, your vendor may not support all of the macOS payloads that are offered by Apple. Payloads could be like enabling file vault, maybe file vault's personal key escrow, system preferences restrictions, doc settings. Here's some examples of something that is maybe primarily geared for iOS that happens to be compatible with a Mac, or like the password or passcode policy payload, Wi-Fi settings. Those happen to work on Mac because they set them up for all of the different platforms. But there may not be a lot of dedicated Mac payloads, or there may be no dedicated Mac payloads with your vendor. So if that happens to be the case, I think it's definitely worth the $20 to buy the server app from the Mac App Store. Even if you're not actually going to use it for any kind of server stuff. I know Apple's pretty much gutting a lot of that's in that app. But the profile manager section in server gives a lot of payload templates that your vendor may not offer. So in my case, my organization installs semantic antivirus. That needed a kernel extension payload, and Meraki didn't offer one, so I turned to Profile Manager. So here's a screenshot of Profile Manager. This is the kernel extension approval payload. And it's great that there's a template, but you do need to find the bundle identifier for the app, and you need to find the team identifier for the app. There's not really much on Apple's part in terms of saying, hey, this is how you go and find this. So I recommend just grab a test Mac, install all the apps that your organization uses, and then if you get a warning like this saying, hey, system extension blocked, then you know that for that particular app, you're going to need a kernel extension payload. So you'll want to just go ahead, go through system preferences, click allow to enable that app. And then you can plug this into terminal to find the bundle identifiers that you need. It's essentially just, this is saying, hey, ignore anything that's from Apple, but show me the bundle identifiers that need kernel extension approval, or I guess I should say that you have, that you previously allowed in system preferences there. So I ran that command, and I got these 3 results. So even though I only had one app, I actually had 3 different bundle identifiers I had to copy down. So I just plugged those into that template that was in Profile Manager. So next you would need to find the team identifier, or the team ID. If you have a developer account and you've ever signed an app, you have a team ID, so this is really all that's searching for. That information is in a SQL database, so you can just plug in that first command into terminal, hit return, hit that second command at the bottom. That's going to search through that database for you. And then I got this result. So you may end up finding more than you need. Like I had Parallels installed on my Mac, but Parallels was not in that previous list under the bundle identifiers, so I knew I could ignore it. All I needed was that semantic team ID there. So again, I just took this, plugged it into Profile Manager, and then I could upload it to my vendor. This one is called, I think I had it at the top over here. Oh yeah, user approved kernel extension loading. Yeah. So yeah, it'd be awesome if Apple had documentation on that. So probably the biggest challenge for me though was figuring out secure token. At my organization, we require that IT has an admin account on each machine that has access or file vault disk access. So if machine gets rebooted, we need to get in for some administrative purpose or something, IT is able to. If your organization doesn't require that you have that, then great. You don't have to deal with this at all. I kind of envy you. Secure token is good for security. I mean, what used to make it easy for admins to just make a package and push it out to our devices to add an admin account, that package didn't even have to be signed. So, malicious actors could take advantage of that too. But that does mean that it is a bit more difficult to create anything in like an automated fashion. So in Sierra or previous OSs, Greg Neagle had a scripting tool. I think it was like Pi user create package, something like that. So I just use that, create a package. You can use net install, AutoDMG, Munki, your MDM provider, whatever it is, just push it out to your Mac, and then boom, you have that admin account there. Some organizations, might prefer, a first-time login script, login hook, something like that. But, regardless of what automated method you are using, if you then try to enable file vault for that user in High Sierra, you kind of get an error like this. So account cannot be used to manage encryption on this Mac. Authentication server refused operation because the current credentials are not authorized for the requested operation. So kind of a lot of gobbledygook. If you do some digging, High Sierra does have a command line tool called sysadminctl. So you can plug this in sysadminctl -- usage, and you can get kind of a summary of everything you can do with that command. You can create new users, delete users, reset passwords, and if you scan a little bit further down, you can find the secure token status for an account. You can enable secure token, or you can disable secure token. So I thought, hey, this is great. I am just going to use the same package I did before, then I'll go back in, use this command to enable secure token on that user, and I'll be good, right? So put in this command first just to confirm, sysadminctl -secure token status, then you could put your admin username in there. And in my case, just as I expected, it said it was disabled for that user account. So now you can do sysadminctl interactive -secure token on, and then you can put your desired username in there. That interactive argument that's in there, what that's going to do is prompt, like in the GUI, for the current logged in admin. This command won't run as root, so there's no like sudo sysadminctl. It's going to be the sysadminctl interactive. So I went ahead and did that, and now I got the result, hey, secure token is enabled for that user. So all right, so everything looks good so far. So it shows it's enabled. I go to File Vault just to double check. I'm not getting any weird errors or warnings here, so that looks good. But then I restart the computer, and it's just my accounts. I don't see that admin user. So, I mean, sysadminctl said it had secure token, but it seems that, because that user was originally created in that automated sense from that package, it just wasn't going to show up here. So the community has been pretty good about finding some general rules for how this is working. So the first account to log in receives secure token. So for most people, that's just going to be at Setup Assistant. So you go through Setup Assistant, get to the desktop, that user has secure token. And this is kind of like a chain of trust. So that user that was then created in Setup Assistant, they can then go into system preferences, into users and groups, and any accounts they make in there get secure token as well. If you are using, or I guess if you don't have an MDM solution right now, you should know that you do have to go through Setup Assistant in some capacity at least, because that is when your MDM server pushes down the configuration profiles. So you can't really skip all of that there. You can use an interactive script with sysadminctl. So I kind of say interactive because an admin does have to be physically present at the keyboard to go through this command. You can't put it in a package. It can't run in the background as root. So this is definitely kind of the biggest roadblock because it is going to slow down what you may have been used to doing. Now there is kind of an exception, and I wish Apple had some firm documentation on this. But if your MDM vendor supports some kind of, maybe called like pre-stage enrollment, admin accounts created kind of in that stage seem to be getting secure token. So at this point, that's kind of like the only really automated way of doing this. This is a screenshot from JAMF Pro. I know it's kind of grayed out, but you can put your admin username, put in a password, set it as an admin, and so, as long as this account is not set to be hidden, then it's getting secure token. So this is definitely something to look for in an MDM vendor. Maybe your vendor has an API that supports something like this. If so, you may want to research that. Unfortunately, I'm not in that boat. I do have to use sysadminctl. So this is the actual command that I'm putting in. So sysadminctl interactive. So again, that's what's going to prompt for in the GUI for that current logged in admin. Dash add user. So then I'm going to put the admin username I want. Dash full name. Even if there's no spaces, you do want to put quotes around the full name there. Dash password, and then I have another dash, so that's like a pass-through option. Yes, you can hard-code a password in there if you want, but it's going to be in plain text, and there's no way to hash it out. So just to avoid that whole security situation, we put in that pass-through option. I'll show a screenshot example in a moment. There is certainly a downside to that, so yeah, next, I do want it to be an admin account, so dash admin. You don't have to have a hint, so that's totally optional, but if you want to have a hint, you can put one in. My organization likes to have a set user icon for this account, so you can do dash picture and then the file path to that user icon. So in my organization, Meraki doesn't, support, like first-time login scripts or login hooks, anything like that. So to get this to like come up automatically, we are using Nomad. So before a new hire gets their Mac, the IT team knows their temporary password. So essentially, what we're doing is we'll log into Nomad, authenticate with this user's temporary password, and then Nomad has support for launching a script upon a successful authentication. So that's what prompts our admins for this. So here's a screenshot example of kind of our workflow. Admins at the desktop, they click Nomad at the top, click log or sign in, authenticate with that user's AD credentials. Now, all the script is really doing is searching in the /users folder. Does this user folder exist? If it does, the script exits. If it's not there, then they immediately get this prompt. So they immediately go right into it. The account there is this new hires account because you are in their user at this point. If you have the password pass-through option like I do, you're then presented with this prompt to create the user password. So you do want to type slowly. There's no secondary prompt to confirm. This is definitely a big, downside to this method. So again, if your vendor supports that kind of pre-stage enrollment, that's what you want to use. So if that's successful, you just automatically get assigned the next UID, you have the home directory created, and you're done. I can go to File Vaults and System Preferences. It's not asking me to do anything weird there, so that looks all good. I'll restart to confirm, and my admin account is there. So in this case, if you use the sysadminctl command, it does show up at the File Vault login screen. There's an example of that script on my GitHub page. Like I said, there's multiple links for it in the slide, so yeah, definitely check it out, edit it for your own organization, tell me I did something wrong. Earlier I mentioned at this point, location services now is disabled by the time my admin gets to the desktop. So I do have a couple extra commands just because, I already have an admin physically at the machine already to run this anyway. So I go ahead and in that same script, I enable location services, set the default time zone, and I think set the host name and local host name. So another challenge, system image utility. So I came from Apple Retail before I joined Bazaar Voice, so I was very comfortable with net install as my primary imaging method. If you're not familiar with system image utility, it's bundled with macOS, and essentially the app generates a .nbi file that it just contains a disk image with a macOS installer. So you can just plug in your Mac into Ethernet, option boot to that server, and select which net install image you want to use. If you've ever created a bootable USB installer using Apple's documentation, very similar boot process, where you're putting in the USB stick, holding down option. Now this K-Base article, How to Install macOS at Your Organization, from 10.13 to 10.13.3, net install and system image utility was an officially approved method from Apple, and it was on that page. And then in 10.13.4, it was removed. So Apple did, announce they were deprecating net install from the server app. So, we kind of had maybe a sense this was going to happen. I just didn't know it was going to be this soon. So, system image utility is essentially abandoned at this point. There are bugs in it that I would like to see fixed just because there aren't alternative solutions for some things that we'll see in a moment. Anthony Reamer made a great chart here, or a great table that kind of breaks down the changes over time on that support doc. There's a link for this at the end of my slides, but you can kind of see there in the middle for net install and system image utility. In December 2017, great, that's supported, and then when 10.13.4 came out in February, it's gone. So here's one bug that is kind of frustrating. So, and there is an option in there. It says automatically install to. You could select which volume you want. And there's an option that says erase target volume before installing. So from 10.13 to 10.13.3, that didn't work because it was still configured for journal to HFS plus, not APFS. So it would act like it would work, like you could get to the end of your image creation in that app and it would say, yep, it's good, but then you would option boot to that installer and it would just hang at a progress bar. Now in 10.13.4, they fixed that, so it does work with APFS. So that sounds good, hey, great, you fixed it, but in 10.13.4 and later, if you add any additional packages, it fails. So some admins in the community have seen that, I think from 10.13 to 10.13.2, if you add just a single package, it works, so long as it has a product ID attribute in the package. I found that pretty consistently what works every time for me is 10.13.3, if I use a 10.13.3 installer. And so these are the 3 packages I add in my imaging workflow. It's just the Munki installer, a small package for Munki configuration, and then a package that skips that data and privacy screen at Setup Assistant. So this is what you see when system image utility fails. Pretty generic error. You try to Google it, it could be hundreds of things. This is what you see in 10.13.3 if you add packages. So it kind of works. I have a little chart here of what does and what doesn't work. So 10.13 to 10.13.2, nothing, really, nothing works. 10.13.3, you don't get an automated erase and install, but you at least have the opportunity to put in some additional packages. I put an asterisk under or over configuration profiles and scripts because, I mean, if you wrap it as a package, it'll work, but if you just put, you know, if you just drop a script in there, or you drop a configuration profile in there, it's not gonna work. And then 10.13.4 through 10.13.6, yes, you do get an automated erase and install now, but nothing else works. So as I mentioned, 10.13.3 is kind of what I've chosen as a net install option, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as to why. Best practice, though, is save your macOS installers. Anytime a new OS comes out, go to the App Store, download it, put it in a directory somewhere, because you never know when you're going to need an old .release, because something doesn't work. This is a great link. It's a post from Greg Neagle about how to add a product ID attribute to your package if you're making a custom package, or let's say you have an existing one that you need to edit and insert a product ID. You know, if you download my slides, this link will be in there for you. So last challenge that you might encounter is user-approved MDM enrollment. So if you're in the device enrollment program, this is not something that you have to worry about at all. I think this is also kind of another little nudge that Apple's giving everybody, like, hey, you really need to be in DEP. Over the years, MDM vendors would supply customers with a package, and the package would just contain like an enrollment profile for that MDM server, and then maybe an agent or a custom binary or something like that for other management options. But in High Sierra, Apple introduced this, you know, kind of explicit user approval to enroll in an MDM server. And, you know, from a security perspective, you can, you know, see their point. You know, you don't want a malicious actor just putting an enrollment profile in some package that's not signed, and then, you know, someone's, you know, tied to some kind of malware. Now, in my environment, I do have a few older Macs that are not in DEP, so there are going to be some edge cases where my admin team is having to do this manual enrollment. And in my case, my vendor was kind of unintentionally ahead of the curve because they never offered a package to enroll in their MDM server. They would just give you a configuration profile. So if you double click the profile, then, you know, you're just going through a series of prompts like this, you know, continue, install, you're prompted for the current logged in admin password. But this is, you know, definitely very tedious manual process. So getting into DEP, really the only way to avoid it. If you did use a package in the past to enroll your Macs, you might have seen this. So if the user didn't explicitly say, yes, I want to be in this MDM server, any additional profiles you push, the user then has to go into system preferences and then explicitly click allow for each profile. So you may thought, hey, I'm saving myself some time and making this custom package to enroll all my machines. it's going to be a headache later on. So unless you're in DEP, at this point, you may just have to have some kind of user-facing documentation, or maybe the admin team themselves are manually enrolling each device. Okay, so with all those challenges in mind, how am I imaging my Macs? And I actually have multiple workflows, and it really just depends on the state of the Mac at the time. So is it new out of the box? Is it already deployed, but it's running High Sierra? Is it already deployed, but maybe it's Sierra or some other older OS? So the first method I'm using is kind of what Apple is pushing everyone toward. It's just the standard macOS installer. And then I'm using the startos install command that they provide. And then secondary method is just our old friend net install. So kind of what I was doing before. And I have a chart here. You can kind of see why I have to break that down. So I do try to have somewhat of a backup method for each one of these. Let's say the network's down, or I run out of Ethernet cables, or someone stole my USB-C to Thunderbolt adapter or Ethernet adapter and I can't find it. So if a new Mac is out of the box, first thing I'm going to do is just that net install workflow using that 10.13.3 installer I was showing a little bit earlier. And then as a backup, I can have a bootable version of that on a USB stick. So there's definitely an asterisk on this, which is that for me, or for this to work, if the Mac's right out of the box, it does have to be able to support 10.13.3, which I thought I had a few more months on, maybe fall, Christmas time would be when Apple released new Macs, but no, yesterday we got some new Macs that have secure boot, just like the iMac Pro. So I have another slide here in just a moment on that. So essentially this will work on any 2017 Mac or earlier, as long as it's not the iMac Pro. If a Mac is already deployed and I'm just trying to re-image it for another user, if they have High Sierra, then I'm using that startos install command, and then I'm using Munki essentially just to help me deliver or deploy that installer to my users. So that's kind of my primary method. As a backup, let's say that you don't have Munki at all. It's not going to be a bootable USB installer, but you can just load up a USB stick with, a script, whatever packages you want, and a macOS installer. And we'll see that command in just a moment. And then this is essentially like the first column. If it's running Sierra or an older OS, I'm doing that install. And the reason I'm doing that is for that startos install command to work, I want the erase and install option. And for erase and install to work, it has to be running at least 10.13. So at least for your older Macs, you may have to keep that older method around. Even if you don't have net install, you might want to make one of those bootable USB installers for that purpose. So, as I said, new MacBook Pros yesterday have the new T2 Secure Enclave chip. So I know that net install is not going to work on that. But another thing just to consider is that by default, out of the box, a bootable USB installer is not going to work either without some additional configuration. So if you have a Mac with secure boot and the T2 chip, you're also going to have startup security utility. So if you boot up the Mac, go into the recovery partition, you'll see this. So there's a couple sections at the top, one for secure boot, and the default setting is for full security. So ensure that only the latest and most secure software can be run. This mode requires a network connection at software installation time. So for me, this really isn't a big deal. I'm not going to adjust that. I'm used to a net install workflow, so I was always plugging in my Macs into Ethernet. Apple also notes that if you're just using the macOS installer and that startos install command, they want you to have an internet connection because that's how the Mac is receiving firmware updates now. So that's not something I'm going to change. Beneath it, external boot, the default option is disallow booting from external media, restricts the ability to boot from any devices such as USB and Thunderbolt drives. So to me, again, this isn't worth changing because let's say now you have a Mac with secure boot, think about that. You're gonna have to unbox it, go into the recovery partition, disable this feature for external boot, and then reboot again and plug in a USB drive or something. That's too many steps for me. The best solution so far that I've seen is Greg Neagle's Bootstrapper. This is something I'm gonna start testing as soon as I get back to the office. So this is probably what I'm gonna use going forward just for a new out-of-the-box Mac. So generally kind of the way it works is you just kind of preload some installers that you want in the script on a USB stick, or I think he also supports like a disk image over HTTP. But you just boot into the recovery partition, open up terminal, run the command. So this is just additional installers. You're not doing an erase and install of the OS. You're keeping whatever OS came from the factory. So really what that's geared for is if you have additional installers that you need to get on. So in my case, it's just Munki, the Munki settings, and that option to skip the data and privacy screen at Setup Assistant. And if I'm gonna reimage a Mac with secure boot, well, that's not gonna change. I can still just use the startos install command, either on a non-bootable USB stick, or I can use it with Munki. So, I guess with all that secure boot stuff being said, this is what my net install workflow looks like right now. This would be exactly the same if you had that bootable USB stick. So we have Mac that's already enrolled in DEP, plug it into power and Ethernet. As I said, this is either with net install 10.13.3 or a bootable USB with 10.13.3. Let's say the install completes. At that point, we can either just shut down the Mac, put it on a shelf for 2 weeks from now when someone needs it, or we can continue with the provisioning. So an admin creates the user's account in Setup Assistant. As that's happening, the MDM server pushes down all the configuration profiles that I want. So when the admin reaches the desktop, we do have them go to System Preferences to the Profile section just to confirm that everything came in. Sometimes this is great, and by the time we reach the desktop, everything's there. Sometimes you wait 5-10 minutes, see what happens. So we do like to confirm it's all there first. So then the admin reboots the Mac, and when it reboots, as soon as it hits the login screen, before they have a chance to log in, Munki comes up and starts installing all the packages I want. Now the reason I'm doing this is, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the application install behavior with my vendor is very hit or miss, so I wanted something that was reliable and easily repeatable, so that's why I'm using Munki. If the Mac needs a macOS update, so in this case, remember I'm only using a 10.13.3 installer, so this is its chance. It's gonna pick up 10.13.6 and run that. So when all that's done, you're still at the login screen, the admin logs back into that user's account. Again, the admin knows this user's temporary password before they've started. They put in that user's credentials into AD, authenticate with Nomad, and then Nomad prompts for sysadminctl. So then the admin can immediately go through that script to create that additional admin user. And then if your organization has other steps, you could essentially be done at that point. If you like to log people into Slack or Outlook or whatever, you can do that at that point. So I've been mentioning this bootable USB installer. So Apple does have a support article using the create install media command. And I wish that command had additional options like startos install. Right now, it's essentially just good for making just the base OS, so if you want to wipe a Mac to factory settings. But there's a little bit of a cheat in system image utility. So with that 10.13.3 installer that I put through system image utility, and it worked when I added those additional packages. So if you go into the file system wherever you saved your net install image, if you double click on that DMG, there's just a macOS installer there. So you can just point that create install media command to that installer that was made in system image utility, and you get a bootable installer that also has your packages that you've added in there. For startOS install and Munki, this is really just a way to try and automate the method of using that startOS install command. And with this, you can use an update date installer. I have 10.13.5. When I get back, I'll update this to 10.13.6. And again, just really the only caveat with this one is the Mac does have to be running at least 10.13 for this to work. So this is what an admin or even just a user in my organization sees in Managed Software Center. We do have a big warning description, don't do this at all. Because at least the way we've configured it, that it has that erase install command. So it's going to wipe their machine. So if a user does accidentally click install and they call in a panic, they usually don't have to worry because most people are on Wi-Fi anyway, not Ethernet. So it's going to take a while for this 5 gig installer to come down. They can easily click cancel. There's also a final prompt that says, and this is from Munki, that's like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? So if you actually do want to go through with the erase and install, yes, click log out and update. Otherwise, you can hit cancel at that point. This is a screenshot of the plist file that Munki uses to kind of automate that startOS install command. I'm really just plugging in all the options I want into that plist, and then Munki just kind of inserts it for me. And there's a copy of this on my GitHub, so if you want to use it as a template for your organization, please go ahead. So this is the actual command. So if you are making just like a USB stick that you're just throwing some stuff on, maybe you want to make this, if you put this into like a .command file, you can just double click it just to kind of have it run. So it's sudo, then the path to the installer, and then within the installer itself, we have /content/resources, then we get startOS install. So the options on here I'm using are agree to license, so that way every time I don't have to hit Y or N in terminal. No interaction, so if you don't keep that in, then there is going to be one final warning from macOS itself to say, hey, are you sure you want to install? If you put no interaction in there, you're not going to get that final warning. Erase and install, which is what I want, and then install package. So you can stack those install packages. So I have 3 on mine. I just wouldn't go crazy. Don't put a Microsoft Office installer. Keep them all pretty small. Really, the only caveat to all this, I have that link earlier in the slides, but these packages do have to have that product ID attribute. So that blog post is pretty good in walking you through how to add it. And then new volume name. So if you don't add in new volume name, it's going to inherit, take the existing volume name after that erase. I always just like to reset it back to Macintosh HD, so that's why I have that in there. So what can Apple improve? A lot. Even just something really simple, it would be great if that create install media command had all these startOS install options like erase install and adding additional packages and new volume name and all that. That's, I think, just kind of a nice base level to get to. But they're definitely going down kind of that DEP train. Using the installer apps, having an active internet connection, not really plugging anything in externally. So if there was some kind of DEP-based recovery partition or internet recovery, I would be happy with that, so long as it had support for all this stuff from startOS install. So if I could do, erase install and install package and, agree to license and new volume name, if that was just all kind of preset from my organization and we could walk up and do Command Option R and it would just kind of do it all, that would be awesome. So, I mean, I hope I was able to give you some ideas on how to navigate High Sierra if your vendor doesn't support everything, and maybe how to use that startosinstall command. I mean, thank you all for coming. Any questions at all? Anyone want to vent about secure token or anything? All right, we got the...
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned that the first user that was created that logged in got a secure token.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that the MDM, if it created the user, it got secure tokens without having to log in first.
Right, and I wish there was like absolute clarity from Apple on that. I know people who use JAMF and Simple, I think Simple MDM as well has that. If not directly, then through an API. But yeah, they seem to be getting secure token.
It couldn't be hidden within the MDM?
Yeah, and that was just from finding like on different forums, people testing around. Almost every post mentioned if they had checked that hidden box, it wasn't getting secure token.
Can they be hidden after the fact?
I don't know. I wish I had JAMF or some other better, macOS support from my vendor, but. Nope. Anyone? No? Okay, well, cool. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.